The first thing I would ask you to do is just observe your kids without reacting to them, because then you can find like, oh, my child is always under things, always in confined spaces. So now I can put a blanket over the kitchen table and make a fort, and they can do their schoolwork in the fort. So then you give them a flashlight. Why? Because flashlights are fun, right? I can get them to sleep by piling stuff on top of them or putting them in a sleeping bag and shoving them in a closet, right? Weird things often work with these kids by observing them. And I'll tie into your company name with Noel's Naturals. Work with their nature. This is the way they came out of the womb. So you can fight it and just crush their spirit, or you can work with that. And I'm not saying work with the defiance and let them just be naturally defiant. Not at all. But if I can work with their natural wiring and the way they're made, it can be a lot more enjoyable. It's just going to irritate you because they're either just like you or exact opposite.
You're listening to The Naturally Noel Show, brought to you by Noel's Naturals, all natural products that really work. And now, please welcome entrepreneur, wife, homeschooling mom of 4, and founder of the Noel's Naturals brand of products, your host, Noel Talley.
Okay, guys, I'm so excited for our guest this week. I know I say that every week, but this week I'm really serious. Today we have with us Kirk Martin. Kirk Martin is the founder of Celebrate Calm and the host of the Calm Parenting podcast, and he has shown almost 1 million parents how to stop the yelling defiance and power struggles with the most strong-willed children. Kirk is known for very practical strategies and scripts delivered with humor and compassion. And through his program, you can learn how to get your kids to listen the first time while building a close, trusting relationship. I know you're going to love our conversation today. Here we go. So welcome today, Kirk. I'm so happy to have you.
Noel, I'm super psyched to be here.
I feel like I'm talking to a friend right now because let's back up. Tell us who you are and tell us about calm parenting and what that's all about.
So when our son was little, I didn't like who he was because a lot of it was, he was basically a little me. And I was like, I don't want you to grow up and go through all the hard things I go with. And he was just that strong-willed kid. And Noel, you know these kids because you are one, right? They want to do things their own way. They don't respond to consequences that well. Little things sometimes like tick them off and throw them off. And so I spent the first 9 years of his life trying to change him until I finally found out I was the one who needed to change. And then when I changed, he changed. So what we do now is we really specialize in working with the strong-willed kids. And so over about 20 years, we've worked with about 1 million families. We love what we do. You just have to reach them, their hearts. You have to reach their hearts and brains in a different way than the neurotypical kids. And so it's frustrating, but for me now, it's a lot of fun.
So how did Calm Parenting, the program, come to be?
So I'll try to do the short version. Casey, our son, kept getting kicked out of schools. So on my lunch break from my regular boring corporate job, I would go volunteer at his school basically to keep him from getting kicked out. And while I was there, I discovered that I was really good at helping the alternative learners and the weird little kids that didn't fit in. And I say weird in a perfectly affectionate way because I prefer the kids who think differently. I'm not a big fan of compliant kids. I think they're boring and they grow resentful later in life. So I'm kidding in a way, but I do like these kids. And so it kind of just snowballed and we started inviting kids into our home. So the idea was we'd have 8, 10, 12, 15 strong-willed kids, kids on the spectrum, uh, adopted kids, a lot of kids with attachment issues in our home. So in our home, what we could do differently was control the environment. So we'd change plans at the last minute. And then the kids would freak out. So we could teach them actually in the moment, how do you control your impulses? How do you deal with frustration? And then I got fired from my corporate job, thankfully, and then transitioned into this. I started getting invited to speak. We started doing live events all across the country and then started a podcast. And it kind of just grew into what it is today, which is it's a cool thing. So
It is a very cool thing, and I can attest to that because I found you. My mom saw you speak at a conference. I was really struggling with our then 4-year old, who is just like me, very strong willed, very precocious, too smart for her own good, and just was really giving us a run for our money. She was our first girl. Our boys were a little more compliant and just not dramatic and didn't scream, and she was just tough. And so she's like, listen to this guy and see what he has to say. So I listened to a couple podcast episodes, and I was like, I'm just going to buy this whole package, and I did, and started listening to it. And I was like, great, this guy's going to tell me what I need to do to fix my kid. And I started listening, and very quickly I was like, I didn't know that I signed up for therapy. Because very quickly, I started to realize, okay, this is about me and my behavior and how I've been behaving badly. And I had to work through a lot of my own junk. And it was really uncomfortable and painful and just like wrecked me. Like there were several times where I had to pause it and just like cry and pray and repent. And it was like therapy. So that's why I say, like, I feel like I know you, because I feel like I've been in therapy sessions with you.
Well, just so people know, we don't do any blame or guilt, right? So it's not like putting guilt on it. It's just the simple truth of the only person you can control in life is yourself. And the quickest way to change your child's behavior is to first control your own. And so it's it's a lot of it. I don't know what the your biggest struggles with, and you don't have to share that, but a lot of times it's like our own anxiety as parents. We have all this anxiety over, well, I want my child to do things the right way, and I want everybody her to be happy, and I want them to do right school the right way and be successful, and we dump all of that on our kids or our control issues, right? We have a lot of control issues, and it's like it's that thing of like children obey your parents. Well, every parent latches onto that, but I think where we get in trouble is we interpret as obey everything I tell you, even all the arbitrary stuff that I want done, right? Like right away because I'm impatient, or obey me in doing things the exact way I want them done, right? My own perfectionism. And the strong willed child will almost always choose a different way to do it. They are not going to do it your way. And then we misinterpret that as like, well, they're being rebellious and defiant. And we get all freaked out and then jump all over them. When if you give them some space and some ways to do it differently, still within your boundaries, they'll often get it done. We just don't like the way they get it done, if that makes
Yes,
sense. I don't know if you struggled with that at all.
I do. I struggle with tending to be more controlling, because I am a perfectionist, and I do have a way that I think things need to be done. And I want things to be done well. Excellence was a very big thing in my childhood. And so, and my parents were very loving and intentional with their parenting, but gentle they were not. And so there was a lot of, yelling, and that was, we deserved it, certainly. And the thing that I love about what you teach is it's different from gentle parenting. And I had read some books on gentle parenting, and it just did not work on this kid. She didn't take me seriously, and it didn't
Right.
feel natural for me, because I'm just not a tender, gentle person. And some mothers are, and I love those people. That's beautiful, but that's not me. And so neither one of us were benefiting from that. And she was just like, I don't know what this fake gentle thing is you're trying, but I'm calling your bluff. And so what I love about what you do is it's calm. And calm says you don't have to be out of control. You don't have to be screaming or shouting at your kids or flipping out to be assertive and to be an authority in your child's life.
Right. So you can be very firm. You can be really tough with kids. I they the strong-willed kids respect that. What they don't respect, I'll say the two excuse me, the two extremes tend to be that really sweet, like, sweetie, baby, mommy really needs your help. And it's almost like a pleading. And that's what your daughter was like. Look, talk to me like an adult. I know I'm 4, but I'm going on 34 and I can deal with this. But that too sweet, too gentle in that sense sounds condescending to them. And you're right. Remind me to bring up that not taking me seriously. Remind me to bring up the intensity part, if you don't mind, Noel, because this is really important for parents. But that really sweet thing doesn't really work. But then when you shift to, you better get your butt up, and the screaming, yelling, intimidation, these are kind of fight or flight kids. So when they hear that, they're, oh, you want to go with that route? Oh, bring it, because I'll bring you to your knees. Right. And that's where a lot of dads can handle everything in life until they walk through the door of their home. And then the child doesn't respond immediately to his demand and request. And then they freak out. And the strong willed child learns, oh, if I just want to throw off the whole house, I just make dad upset by doing one little thing. And so, right in between there is what you said. I'm in control of myself. Look, strong willed child, you have a choice to make right now. I don't need you to make I don't need you to make this choice. I'm just letting you know this is how I roll in my home. Here's where things go really well for you, and here's where things don't go well for you. And it gives them what we call ownership, right? I want to give kids ownership of their choices within my boundaries. And so you can still be very firm, but you're not breaking the child down. You're not taking it personally. You're not saying, you know what, if you don't get your little butt, how come? All those kind of shaming things that we do, Noel, where it's kind of, we take it personally and then say things. How are you ever going to be successful in life? Like, that's brutal. But learning how to be tough and say, like, look, can I give you one example with my
Yeah,
son when he was older?
absolutely. I love your examples. I feel like I'm buddies with Casey.
Yes, well, you would be. You would very much be ready for Casey. So here's a comment, like, in his preteen and teen years, like, he'd come at me with that tone, right? And everybody knows what that tone is. And typically, as parents, we get defensive, right? And we take it personally. I can't believe after all I've done for you that you would talk to me like that, right? And it's like, I, I don't want this to sound harsh, but it's like we have to grow up. Like, I'm the grown adult. I expect my teenager to not like anything that I say, right? I want them to experience and love my wisdom. But their strong-willed child's never going to say, like, Dad, you know what? I didn't agree with you, but you have so much wisdom. I thank you for that, right? Like, it's so I remember, rather than just going after him, I'd say, Case, listen, the last 43 times you've used that tone with me, you were either anxious, frustrated, or hungry, because those are his three triggers, even to this day. So, two options, son. You may continue to use that tone with me. It's just not going to end well for you, right? It's not going to end well. You're going to lose your stuff. So, my discipline, as you can hear there, it's firm, it's even, matter of fact, but I take the energy out of that. It's just not going to end well. It's just the way I roll. But and then the energy goes to, but if you want to go get some chips, I'll grab some salsa. I'll meet you out on the deck. I'll help you with whatever you're struggling with. Because what one of our phrases is, motion changes emotion. When kids are getting upset, I don't go toe to toe with them. We need to talk about your attitude right now, young lady. Right? Like, that never works. It escalates. So now I'm inviting him. I've identified you're not just being a jerk. You're anxious, you're frustrated, or you're hungry. So now I've identified three different things we could work on. I can problem solve. You go get that. I'll meet you in a different place. Hey, I was going to run up to the store, grab something. If you want to come along with me, you can grab something from the convenience store, because driving next to each other is a great place to talk. Throwing a football, building with Legos, coloring, busy mom, homeschooling mom with 18 children or four, right? You can't go out and play catch, but you can say, oh man, if I were you, I'd be frustrated too. Hey, could you go in the pantry, grab some spaghetti sauce? Could you twist that top off for me? And now I just gave the child something to do that wasn't, you need to get control of your emotions, young lady or young man. And now I'm inviting my child to help me and into relationship. And then we can work on whatever's going around. So
Yeah.
I don't have to take it. I didn't say, oh, it's okay that you're feeling like that. Why don't we explore your feelings? I'm not a big fan of always talking about feelings. What I'd rather give the child is tools to deal with their feelings, not just identify them.
Yeah.
Because
And
to me, that's kind of irritating.
what I love so much about that concept is it's so empowering both to the parent and to the child. Because for me, when I
Hmm.
found myself, when I took your course, I felt out of control. I felt like I didn't have an intuitive sense of how to parent this kid. And everything I was doing felt wrong. And what you did when I say I was wrecked and I realized I had been behaving badly, what I mean was you said, here's what you are responsible for. And I realized, oh, I've been putting all of the blame on a 4-year-old child who has no idea how to regulate her emotions. Yet I'm an adult woman and I've not been regulating my emotions. So what that did was it empowered me to say, okay, I can do this. I don't know what to do about a 4-year-old, but I can fix me. And that gave me a place to
Hmm.
start where I felt in control and I felt in the driver's seat. And that was a huge help to me to to feel like, okay, this is where I can actually be functional and improve myself. And I'm a big proponent for working on yourself. And so you give me a project that's internal, I'm like, okay, I'll start digging some stuff up. Let's do this. And so it actually helped me in all of my relationships. It helped me as I interacted with people. It helped me, one of the things I love that you talk about is quitting your job of trying to fix people and quitting your job of participating in drama. And so just in all areas of my life I started to realize, okay, I'm engaging and participating in these behaviors that are not benefiting anyone, and I'm carrying this over into my parenting too. And so it gave me something to fix, and I love to fix.
You're like a guy that way, right? You like to give me something to fix. You
Yes.
know what? It's so liberating, isn't it? Like, just think about the holidays. It is every mom, holidays, everything carries so much of a burden of, I've got to make sure everything's okay. And I've got to make sure everybody's happy. And I've got to coordinate and make sure that Aunt Marge brings this and everybody does that. And moms are always in that mode of managing everybody else's emotions, and it will lead to adrenal fatigue, right? It leads to resentment in your marriage because now hubby comes home and he escalates things. So you're managing the kids' emotions, then you're managing your husband's emotions because he can't control himself. Well, now you lose respect for your husband, right? And there's a cascading of all these things. But when you focus on yourself, the coolest part to me was honestly not just in parenting and marriage. It's just my internal sense of being is I'm responsible to people. I like to be giving and generous and make people's day, but I'm not responsible for them. I'm not responsible to make sure everybody's happy and learning to look. I'm going to do a podcast on this soon because my niece, who is now had her own child, but when she was little, I would take her in her stroller and then she'd get out and walk because she was very strong willed, and she'd always want more. I want more rocks. I want more ice cream. And I remember saying to her, I am completely comfortable with your disappointment. I am okay with you crying and screaming in public. One, because I'm not your dad. So I'm not embarrassed by your behavior. But you've heard these phrases, your mood does not determine or change my mood. Your behavior does not change my behavior. You're free to melt down right now if you want because I didn't buy you three of those things and only two. I'm okay. I'm comfortable with your disappointment. In fact, you should be disappointed. I'm okay with that because once you liberate yourself from having to control everyone, those situations tend to take care of themselves pretty quickly because we tend to add on, right? We try to here's another one we do. We try to convince our kids. There's no need to be disappointed, right? It's what every husband does to his wife. Honey, there's no need to be upset. You're just overreacting. Everything's okay. Because as humans, we're very uncomfortable with other people's emotions. And so when I got comfortable with that, it was like, man, I can handle just about everything in life because I'm responsible to people, but I'm not responsible for them. And that's kind of a neat little shift.
Yeah. It's funny whenever you talk about like the dads and you give these analogies of these dads coming home, and I actually really resonate with those analogies because I'm a
Yeah.
lot like my dad. And my husband tends to be a little more just easygoing, and I tend to be the more aggressive one. And so, it's funny because he he gets along very well with our daughter because he gets along well with me. She's like me, and he likes me, so he's fine with her being
Right.
strong-willed.
That's
So
awesome.
a good friend of mine, asked because early on in our marriage, I did not know how to manage my emotions, and he was having to manage them for me, and it was problematic early in our marriage. And thankfully I was in school for counseling, and there were a lot of tools that I was learning at that time for how to communicate. And so I was explaining to him, listen, I explode. It's something that I do. I hate it about myself. But when I
Mm.
explode in those moments, if you can find a way to disarm me, that would be so helpful to me, because in the moment I'm flooded and I can't get out of it. So is there like a code word? Is there something we can do where you can help disarm me? And he's a good guy, so he's like, yes, of course I want to do that, of course I want to help you. So he just started make would make a joke, and so we would be arguing, and he'd do something funny, and that would just distract me and pull me physiologically out of that. And eventually I began, I'm in my 20s, first for the first time learning how to regulate my emotions. But he was so good at that and is still so good at that, and he does the same thing with her. He's really good at disarming her. And so a friend of mine asked me, she was like, if Adam's good with her, what are the things that you see that he does with her, and what does he do with you when you're upset? And I realized, wow, like he's a master at this disarming thing. And so I started to kind of copy that with my kids. And you talk a lot about that, what you were talking about, like the changing scenery, and just moving out of the room, just doing something to pull your brain out of that, fight or flight response, and into a more
Right.
positive place where actually work can be done.
Kudos to your husband. That's awesome. Um, I want to hit on intensity a little bit. And this
Yes.
is something to try with a strong-willed child. And again, some of these things you just have to try and see how they respond to it. Here's a common situation. So you get a little kid, he makes a paper airplane, or she flies it. It doesn't fly well. So they pick it up and they're like, stupid airplane. This is the dumbest thing. And they start to crumple it up. And like every good mom and dad will come and say, oh, honey, that was a good airplane. And the child's like, duh, if it was a good airplane, it would have flown, right? And then it escalates because you're trying to convince the child of something that they know isn't true. And so, this idea of intensity, what I would rather do is say, you know what? If I were you, I'd be frustrated too. Put a lot of time into making that airplane, it didn't fly right. So, what do you want to do now? So there's something about validating with intensity, because you used this phrase earlier. If you just say, oh, honey, it's okay, everything's going to be okay, my response is, you're not taking it seriously.
Hmm.
This meant a lot to me. It didn't go the right way, and I'm frustrated. And just because you don't share that frustration doesn't mean that I'm not frustrated, right? So when I come in with some intensity and say, and I love that phrase, if I were you, I'd be frustrated too. It is almost immediately calming, because it's like, it's okay to be frustrated. Absolutely. Now, what I didn't say is, if I were you, I'd punch a hole in the wall and go hit your sister, right? That's not what I said. But I validated the frustration, because it is frustrating. And then with some measure of intensity, sometimes I'll do the motion changes emotion. Hey, you know what? Why don't you come help me? I need some help in the garage. I need some, that movement out of where you are, even for a minute, can calm them down. I like, you said this earlier about yourself. When you feel upset, you're out of control. You feel like you're out of control inside. And that's why I like having, especially with a strong willed child, like a list on your refrigerator of all the things they can do in the moment that make them feel in control of themselves. Like that example with a mom of like, hey, could you get the spaghetti jar and get the top off for me? See, what the kid's thinking is, I don't know how to calm down right now, but I do know how to twist the top off of that,
Hmm.
right? I don't know how to control my emotions right now, but I do know how to build a spaceship out of my Legos,
Hmm.
right? So I'd encourage parents, have some go-to things that your kids can do when they're upset, lead them to that. Some of it's very physical things, some of your sensory kids. I love having an obstacle course in the basement or the backyard, things your kids have to crawl under, crawl over, pull, push. Some of your kids are weird. They would shovel mulch like all day long. So just get like a half truckload of mulch dumped in your backyard. Oh, you know what? I forgot. I needed a hole dug in the backyard and then fill it with some mulch. And some of your kids will be like, good, see you in 3 hours. Perfect. And then you go out there and shovel with them. And while you're shoveling, you can talk to them after they're calmed down. You are smiling right now. Are you a mulch shoveler yourself? Or
No,
is your
I
daughter?
I do. She is. She has a mud kitchen outside and just will stay out there for hours and just loves getting her hands on things. And I was the same way. Do you find a lot of strong-willed kids are very kinesthetic?
Yes. A lot of sensory seekers. So that kind of playing in the mud, it is very, in a way you could say it's calming for the body.
Mm-hmm.
And so the physical pressure, can I tell you a funny, weird story? So we've got all these kids in our house back in the day. And I noticed they would take the cushions off the sofa and then lie down on the hard part of the sofa. And so your first response is, what a bunch of weird little kids. And what I always tried to do is step back and think, what need is that meeting? Because all human behavior is driven by meeting some kind of need. It's serving us. So I was like, oh, physical sensory pressure. So I began doing this, having a code word when kids are upset, because when you talk too much, using too many words when kids are upset tends to make them more upset. So a kid would get upset, and I would say, sofa. And their job was to go in the living room, throw the cushions off my sofa because I knew they weren't going to place them down nicely, right? A lot of this is understanding the kids and what their nature is. And then they would lie down on the hard part of the sofa. I would then walk in the living room, put the cushions on top of them, and then sit on top of the cushions. And it was instantly calming for the kids. One, it's weird, and weird stuff works with strong willed kids. Two, the physical pressure was very settling to them. And then the third thing was I wasn't giving them eye contact because I don't like giving eye contact to kids when they're in trouble or when they're upset, because they tend to be going through this little shame impulse inside, beating themselves up like, I'm so stupid. I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to be in trouble. And then we gaze right into their eyes. So that's why I prefer having talks while you're walking, building with Legos, driving next to your child, or sitting on top of them on the sofa. But it was a really cool thing. And you mentioned like the sensory seekers. So we began incorporating that into a lot of what we did, even doing schoolwork while hanging off the sofa upside down, reviewing vocabulary words while some of us have kids who are spinners. They just spin all day long. It's meeting a vestibular need. So instead of freaking out, you use the stuff that irritates you. The stuff that irritates you, use it to your advantage because it just works better that way.
So I want to ask you a practical question. Having been through the program, you know, Emerson Eggerichs talks about the love and respect, and he talks about this crazy cycle within marriages where the husband will feel disrespected, and so he acts unloving toward the wife, and then the wife feels unloved, and so she acts disrespectful, and it's this crazy cycle that goes on and on until someone breaks it. And I feel like sometimes I end up in this crazy cycle with my kids, and it where we're really good at boundaries, and we're really on them, and they get in line, and they're like, okay, yeah, we know how things go, and then they're behaving well, and then we kind of back off a little and get a little lax, hoping that they'll kind of take responsibility and continue these things on their own, and then they slowly kind of digress back into bad behavior again, and then we find ourselves getting irritated, and then we go back to that cycle of yelling at them, and I forget everything I learned in calm parenting, and I find myself in this crazy cycle, and then I go back and listen to the 30 days to calm, and then I remind myself again, how do you deal with this crazy cycle in this situation?
Can I be honest? I think that's just normal, right? I think I would probably normalize that and say that's just normal. Every one of us goes through cycles all the time, and then we forget things and we come back. It's just my goal would be shorten the cycle. And I'm sure this has happened every time you go back into they're getting a little bit, pushing the boundaries and you have to come in. When you come back in yelling again or doing whatever, I'm sure that doesn't last as long as it used to. You catch yourself. And then we call it like practicing the reset. It's like you practice the reset. It's like, oh, yep, I just got out of hand. The last couple of days, I've been off, I've been yelling, and then you just reset yourself. But I think it's an unrealistic expectation to expect that you will never have hiccups and bumps in the road. To me, it sounds like you're doing this in a perfectly healthy way, which is you get in that cycle
Hold
and
on.
then you course correct.
Say that last sentence again so I can cut out that little blip.
Sorry about that. Someone's
That's okay.
calling me on.
I wish I was as good at you and able to be imperfect, but I can't.
Oh, I will. I'm gonna hold on. Stop calling on consultation or whatever. Sorry about that. It's
You're
my
fine.
brother, and he will call like 100 times in a row because he knows I'm doing this. He's such a son of a jerk.
You know what? Maybe like I might just leave this in just
Believe it
to
because this is
irritate myself.
yes. We talk Noel. Practice imperfection. Look, it's authenticity, right? It's how life works. And I don't even know what you asked me. What was I supposed to say? Oh, it's that I don't know what it was. It was that it's unrealistic to expect yourself to just always do it the right way. It's the course correction of saying like, "Oh, yep, we're back out of line here. Let me get back in." That's that's perfect. That's the perfect cycle. Because I
Yeah.
don't want moms and dads to labor under something of like, oh, I always have to do it the right way. It's actually like it's a teaching opportunity for your kids when you lose it to say, you know what? That was my issue. I I I I'm behind all my work, and so I got anxious and I took it out on you. I apologize for that. Now you've just modeled taking ownership for your own behavior without saying those things of like, well, nobody's perfect, because that's what politicians say when they get caught. Right? I'd rather just say like, no, I'm a perfectionist. And so little things irritate me. Even giving voice to that is very, very powerful. Of like I struggle to this day. I'm 56. I struggle with anxiety. I don't like new experiences, but I can verbalize it and then I can overcome that. But I think in our society, we've made everything kind of into a diagnosis or requiring a diagnosis. It's one of my big things with kids with anxiety is if you take a child to a therapist to talk about their anxiety every week, they will end up being extraordinarily anxious, right? Now, if your child's struggling with depression or severe anxiety, get help. But most of your kids, what they need to know is, of course, you're anxious. You should be nervous going to a new place. There are all these unknowns that you don't know what to expect there. So you should be a little bit nervous when you go to that place. Right? Does that make sense? Because otherwise, it's like there's no need to be anxious. Well, sure, there is. And if there's no need to be anxious, or if we say to our kids, you know, that homework, that schoolwork isn't that hard. Well, if it's hard for me, then I must be stupid.
Mm,
If I shouldn't be anxious, but I am, then maybe something's wrong with me. And there's nothing wrong with you. You just don't like going to new places because of all the unknowns. And that's human nature.
yeah.
And so I don't stop there. I give them tools to say, hey, if I have a child who doesn't like to go to the Taekwondo practice, I make sure I take him a few days ahead of time and I ask the instructor to give him a job to do. So when he gets there, his brain is focused on completing the job another adult gave him because most strong willed kids are awesome for other people and horrible for their parents.
The thing I love so much about that is that it's authentic but also empowering because there's this thing within mommy culture that's all about authenticity. Like let's normalize mom buns and let's normalize the messy house and it's like we're all in this together and we're all a hot mess express and all that stuff. For a time I was attracted to that cuz I was like, yeah, girl, But then it was like, okay, so we're all here in this messy house. Where do we go from here? Do we stay here, or how do we get out of this? It only feels good for a minute because you're like, okay, I'm not alone. But then it's like, no, but I don't want to stay here. I'd like to get out of this. So what are the tools to move forward? And that's what I love so much about this is it shows the problem, but then there's also an antidote. Like, okay, here's where you've been struggling a little bit. Let's talk about that. That's normal. That's okay to struggle. But here's how we improve, and here's how we move forward, and here's how we help your children to improve. We don't want to just stay in this place of authenticity and all feel like crap, you know?
I can hear the subtle disdain for that. Like, I don't want to be like that. Like, don't normalize. So here's a good example for like schoolwork. Of course, and I love the phrase of course, right? Because it's normalized. Of course, you don't want to do that writing assignment. I'm making you write about something you're not even interested in. Of course, that's difficult, but it's got to be done, right? There's no convince, it's got to be done. So here are three different ways, three different tools to help you do that writing project. One could be, let's put on some really intense music, right? Because sometimes intense music is actually very good for the brain when people are writing. Let's get some movement, or here's a weird one. Let's write down everything you can think about on that topic. And if you're writing it on paper, make it as messy as you want. There's something about the hard part is getting the thoughts from the head down onto paper. So nobody will be able to see this, but Noelle can, of like, I've got notes written sideways, upside down. Now, my wife and other people, maybe you as a perfectionist, will be like, oh, how do you do that? For me, it actually helps me. When I take notes, I write my notes in a very messy way. Not because I'm lazy, but because there's something about that I like. So again, it doesn't mean it's going to work with all of your kids, but try some different things. So you normalize and then you give some tools to do it differently.
That's one of the cool things about homeschooling is that we have that freedom to do things in a weird and wacky way, and my mom was really good at that. So I'm a perfectionist, but I'm also a free spirit. So I'm it's a very weird place to be inside my
Yes,
brain.
yes.
But
I like it though.
my mom is very type A. So I was just this like willy-nilly all over the place creative kid, and she really honed me in and gave me tools for how to be a free spirit with some organizational skills at the same time. So I'm kind of
Right.
a dichotomy.
Very much so. Well, that's why we all like to listen to you, because it's a different perspective, right? It's like, how can you be driven and actually get things done, but also be creative and have some very different ideas? That's the beautiful part of it. So
Well, and
don't
I love
change.
thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I do love that because early on when we started, you said in the beginning you found you didn't like being around your son, and I was really finding myself to be in that place where she was just driving me nuts all the time, and I was like, this isn't good. I don't want to feel like I don't want to be around my kid. And and I love what you do where you say don't change them, don't seek to change them. See where they're skilled, see where their strengths are, and pull those things out. If they're acting out, odds are it's because they're not being able to talk or think or express themselves in the way that feels naturally to them. They're trying to fit into your box. And that's an
Mm.
uncomfortable place to be. And gosh, do I resonate with that because I've never fit into any box from anybody. And I've always been a rebel and I've always done things my own way. It's why my mom started homeschooling me because it wasn't working out at public school.
Mhm.
She's like, we're going to have to do something different for this kid. And
Exactly.
yeah, I mean it's the same for really all my kids, but one or two particularly just have their own way of doing things, and for me to steal that from them is really a shame. And I love that you just empower that, like, see what's good in your children and let's pull that out.
Yeah, and one of my favorite phrases is to look at your kids or child sometime and say, "I wish I was more like you. I wish I was more," right? Whatever it is that's opposite of you, I wish I was more assertive like you, right? Because a lot of our kids, they tell you exactly what they want, and we're like, wow, they're so bossy. I'm like, well, that's also called being assertive, right? Like one thing I love about my son is you never had to guess what he was thinking. Like he's a very direct kid. And so I appreciate that and I can work with that. So that phrase of, you know what? I wish I was more like you in that area. Wish I was more creative. I wish I pushed the limits and the boundaries a little bit because I live in this little box and I just check things off. Your dawdlers and your dreamers, right? The little kids who daydream all the time. By the way, Noel, this is a cool phrase sometimes because we're always like, she's always daydreaming as if it's a bad thing, right? It's a fantastic trait to have. It's just irritating because they don't get anything done. But the way to get them back isn't to say, hey, are you listening to me? Honey, you need to listen because that'll for sure they're going to be like, you know what? You have no idea what's going on in my brain and I'm just going to check out. But if you were to say, or a teacher said, you just went somewhere in your brain, I bet it was really interesting. Tell me where you just went and let them tell you what they were imagining instead of just like, okay, fine with the imagination, but we have stuff to do, right? Go with it sometime. We have taught kids how to calm down. I was doing a phone consultation with parents and their daughter, when she gets upset, remember, out of control, I was like, what does she like to line up or align? And she was like, oh, they're like, she gets her dolls out and she teaches them because one day she wants to be a teacher. So I was like, okay, so here's a way. So she wouldn't sweep the floor, clean the kitchen. And I said, so why don't you tell her, hey, one day when you've got your own classroom and you need your students to clean, how do you think you could get them to clean? So it stepped it out of, young lady, you need to clean, to now I'm going to give you some ownership. And then she began cleaning in all these weird ways, right? With the broom behind her back and between her legs backwards, right? In all kinds of funny ways. Not efficient, right? Not efficient, but she got it done just in a different way. But anyway, the daydreaming part, look, all these traits that your kids have, the first thing I would ask you to do is just observe your kids, observe them without reacting to them and learn about them. Be a detective because then you can find like, oh, my child is always under things, always in confined spaces. Okay, so now I can put a blanket over the kitchen table and make a fort, and they can do their schoolwork in the fort in the dark. So then you give them a flashlight. Why? Because flashlights are fun, right? I can get them to sleep by piling stuff on top of them or putting them in a sleeping bag and shoving them in a closet, right? Weird things often work with these kids by observing them. And I'll tie into your company name with Noel's Naturals. Work with their nature. This is the way they came out of the womb. So you can fight it and crush their spirit, or you can work with that. And I'm not saying work with the defiance and let them just be naturally defiant. Not at all. But if I can work with their natural wiring and the way they're made, it can be a lot more enjoyable. It's just going to irritate you because they're either just like you or exact opposite.
Yeah. So, gosh, I could talk to you for 6 hours and that would just be so much fun. But I don't want to take your whole day. But I have one last thing that I kind of wanted to ask about and touch on. Um,
Okay.
you're pretty honest in the program and in the recordings that you were not always this way, that you came from kind of an authoritarian background and you did all the wrong things and yelled at your kid and did the threatening and all these things. And so what age was Casey? I mean, it sounds like he was school age when you finally started to get these things. And how did you set about the process of kind of repairing that damage? Because that was where I kind of found myself. I was like, okay, cool tools, but what about the hurt that I've caused already? And how do I repair that moving forward?
That's really good. So he was about 9.5 when I started kind of getting control of myself and realizing this. And a lot of it, to be honest, I just started working on myself, right? I mean, there were apologies to him of like, hey, I'm sorry I did that. I reacted. But what meant apologies are good, but if it's apology and then you keep repeating it all the time, then it's like, I don't trust you. So I think what Casey would say is our relationship was restored over time as he saw me. Like I think it was as he literally saw me in the moment, the old way that I was, wanting to react, getting the voice up, using my hands, towering over him. And I started sitting instead. And it slowly began to rebuild trust so that in those situations, he knew I became a safe place for him. And so there's for older kids, it is there is an apology, but it's not endless apologies, right? It's just, hey, I want to figure out uh, how you work, and it's starting to bond with your kids. One of my favorite things is to bond with your kids over something they're interested in, not what you're interested in. And here's a really cool one, Noel. If you want to bond with your kids, is let them teach you something. That is a huge one. I do that a lot with men, a lot of dads and their sons, especially in the teen years. It's like, let your son teach you something that he knows, because it changes the whole dynamic and it makes them feel confident, and you're listening, and it's like, I'm taking interest in their stupid Call of Duty video game, but I'm being curious about it. I'm not saying you have to do that, but I don't know if I answered your question the right way, but
I
I
have
just
this.
started working on myself. Go
Yeah, go
ahead.
ahead. No, go ahead. Well, I have this friend, Fallon Dene, who she's not a friend. I feel like she's a friend. I feel like everyone that I follow is a friend. I get to know all these people over the internet, but this girl I follow, Fallon Dene, she just posted this thing the other day that said that she's found that when she feels irritated by her kids and they're just driving her nuts, and she feels like she needs a breakaway, she has actually found that that's not what she needs at all. What she needs is more focused time with her children, to
Mhm.
reconnect with them. And that, and I was talking to my husband about that. I was like, think about that in our home. When our kids are acting crazy, it's probably because we've been ignoring them and they're just running amok and doing whatever they want to do. If we were to just kind of focus back and just say like, hey, what do you want to do? Like, what are you interested in? What can I listen to about, and just get in their world, it brings things back to a place of just connectedness, and they feel valued.
That's awesome. I think we should end with that. It's connection, right? Like connection breeds cooperation. It is relationships. I try to say it on almost every podcast. Relationships change behavior. Consequences are important, but they don't change behavior. But a relationship that I was going to say before, humility. I think the humility as a parent breaks down some of those walls that the strong-willed kids have built up as defense mechanisms. And that's why when we come at them, you know what, you're going to do it this way. It's like, okay, come on, I'm just going to build another wall. Like bring more of that, Dad. We're just not going to have a relationship. But when I started to humble myself, it just breaks down those walls. And once you have that connection, then the cooperation, then it that's an awesome insight by you. So yeah,
Well, thank you
connection.
so much for your time. I'm just so geeked over this. You're amazing. And I know this is going to be such a great resource for our listeners. They're just going to love this.
Noel, you're awesome.
Thank
You're
you.
so honest and authentic, but you don't stay right where you are, right? You're real with it, but you've got that spunky part, but then you've got the connection part, and it's a really cool thing. So I'm glad your voice is out there, because I think a lot of moms and dads, but a lot of moms will relate to you in ways that they don't always relate to someone who's a little bit more meek. Like you're a go-getter, and so you can be the go-getter but be connected, and that's a really cool thing.
Thank you guys so much for listening today. If you got as much out of this as I have and you're super excited about getting started with Kirk's program, he has generously offered our listeners 50% off the Calm Parenting package or the Get Everything package at calmparenting.com. You can use code Noelle, that's Noelle, for 50% off, guys. You will not regret this. This is a huge investment in your family and just your overall peace. I know you're going to love the program as much as I did. I'm so thankful for his generosity to give our listeners this amazing discount. So definitely take advantage of it. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Naturally Noelle Show, empowering you to live a more natural life, one step at a time.